Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its mission? To explore strange new worlds, to discover new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
With the recent relative success of Star Trek Resurgence, and hot off the announcement of 2 new Star Trek games in 2025, I've been thinking a lot about Star Trek's rocky history of video game adaptations. Specifically, I've been thinking about the ludic genres that developers have often adapted Star Trek into, and how many of them just haven't worked very well for this particular franchise. I want to disclaim right up front that these videos will contain some potential spoilers for Star Trek TV shows, movies, and also for the video games that I will be discussing. This video's intended audience is Star Trek fans, and so I'm assuming that most of you Star Trek fans watching will have already seen most, if not all, of Star Trek's TV and cinematic installments, up to and including the likes of Strange New Worlds and Picard's 3rd season. If spoilers are going to be a problem, then you honestly might want to just stop right now and come back to this later after you've watched all thousands of hours of Star Trek, since I will be dropping a big Deep Space Nine spoiler in just a couple of minutes here, and I will not be shying away from other spoilers in this episode or in the subsequent episodes of this series, so please consider yourself warned. I have been working on this particular project off and on in fits and spurts for 2 full years in between other projects. I really hope that everyone likes it, and if you would like to support the creation of content like this, I hope you'll consider sending me $1 or $2 on Patreon. This entire 5-part series is available early to patrons, so if you are eager to watch the next installment after you're done with this one, but it isn't up yet, you can head over to the Patreon page and either become a monthly patron or unlock the next episode with a one-time donation. Thank you to all my patrons, past, present, and future. You've really helped to offset the cost of creating content like this and of maintaining my blog for all these years. Now, on to the show. Video games tend to be driven by action. More specifically, they tend to be driven by violent action. This is because graphical computing is very good at creating virtual spaces, creating virtual objects, and moving and manipulating those objects within those virtual spaces. Computers simulate simple physics very well, and that includes ballistics. As such, mazes, gravity, and projectiles end up being among the lowest hanging fruits for graphics and computation. Further, the primary input methods that we currently have for video games are limited by the number of fingers on our hands and the common reaction time of human adults. Thus, games tend to favor mechanics that rely on hand-eye coordination, muscle memory, and relatively simple commands that can be executed with a single finger or two. Combining these input limitations with the ease with which computers render environments and do basic physics and ballistics, we end up with platform jumping, obstacle courses, and shooting being de facto challenges in most video games. Star Trek, on the other hand, being a weekly syndicated television series running on a tight budget, has rarely been an action-driven series. The appeal of Star Trek for most of its longtime fans has been its character-driven storytelling and socio-political sci-fi allegory that holds a mirror on complex issues of the day and usually presents a progressive interpretation or solution to the issue at hand. Well, progressive for the times anyway. The original series and first season or 2 of The Next Generation in particular have some episodes that were, shall we say, not as forward-thinking as they probably should have been, and which don't hold up very well to today's audiences. Regardless, Star Trek as a franchise has often focused on political, social, or ideological conflicts that are settled via peaceful or non-violent resolutions. Either that, or it's an anomaly of the week that creates a scientific or engineering puzzle for the characters to solve. The major exception to all of this is, of course, the second half of Deep Space Nine. As a series, Deep Space Nine is more concerned about how the lofty ideals of the Federation hold up in less than ideal environments, and against more belligerent opponents who are not willing to accept peace as an answer. But in typical Star Trek fashion, and in stark contrast to some of the more recent Star Trek shows and movies, Deep Space Nine still found a way to settle its most core conflicts with a humanitarian olive branch, rather than with violent subjugation. Even in the darkest installments of Star Trek, the message is still that even the most ruthless and unforgiving of enemies can and should still be treated with humanity and respect. That turning an enemy into a friend is a far greater victory than beating them into submission. So yes, there is violent conflict and action in Star Trek, especially in Deep Space Nine. Unlike, say, Doctor Who, the characters of Star Trek will, and often do, pick up a phaser and fight their way out of certain situations. But the stories are rarely, if ever, about that violence, and it isn't the primary appeal of the franchise. And when an episode or story is about violence, it's usually very critical of that violence. When a video game chooses to adapt Star Trek into ludic paradigms centered around violent conflict, it isn't necessarily unprecedented within the series. They may end up with a fine game, mechanically speaking, but the developers will be opening themselves up to accusations of not getting Star Trek as a brand. This is because the overwhelming majority of Star Trek as a franchise is about the humanity of its characters, how they interact with each other, and how they solve problems together, and the lengths that they will go to avoid violence. These are things that computers currently are not very good at simulating. Computers can easily calculate the trajectory of a photon torpedo, but they aren't necessarily as good at calculating an appropriate conversational or emotional response to a player's input. This is what makes Star Trek Resurgence stand out as a piece of digital interactive Star Trek media. Resurgence does emphasize story and character over phaser fights, starship battles, and navigating obstacle courses. It still has phaser fights and starship battles and obstacle courses, but the vast majority of the game is about dialogue, and using that dialogue to solve political, scientific, and engineering problems. So while Star Trek Resurgence may not be the best video game, due to its limitations of player agency and interactivity, it is, at least in my opinion, a pretty good Star Trek game. There's actually a pretty surprisingly diverse gamut of Star Trek games. We've had point-and-click adventures, we've had first-person shooters, we've had third-person shooters, we've had tactical strategy games, we've had grand strategy games, we've had starship operation games, some of them in VR, we've had dogfighting games, we've had MMORPGs, heck, we've even had a Star Trek-themed city-building game. And maybe even a survival horror game? These games have varied in quality as video games, and they've also varied in quality as adaptations of Star Trek, and rarely, if ever, have they been good at both of those at the same time. Obviously, I have not personally played every single Star Trek video game that has ever been made, not even close, so I can't go through them all and tell you whether any given one is good or bad, or how well it adapts the source material. Instead, I want to talk about the broader ludic genres that video game developers have chosen to adapt Star Trek into, and how appropriate each of those feels relative to the source material, and whether there might be any untapped potential therein. I'll talk about the specific games that I have played, or which I'm otherwise familiar with, as well as how well they worked as games, and how well they hold up as adaptations of the source material. If I come across a particular game that I've never played before, and wasn't able to track down a playable version for me to play for research for this video, then I would have at least tried to watch a Let's Play or Longplay. There will be quite a bit of gameplay footage from YouTube channels like World of Longplays, and all links to any outside sources will of course be included in the description of this video. Let's start with the game that was the impetus for this whole endeavor, Star Trek Resurgence. Resurgence is made by Dramatic Labs, which is composed of many ex-Telltale employees. Given the emphasis on story and characters in Telltale games, I think this happens to be a very good fit for the Star Trek IP, and I'm honestly very surprised that given how nerdy Telltale seems to be, that they never managed to get a Star Trek license to make a Star Trek game. Because of the focus on dialogue and decision-making, Star Trek Resurgence is able to replicate some of the social and interpersonal dynamics of Star Trek. One decision that comes up several times in Star Trek episodes and movies which Dramatic Labs adapted into Resurgence, is those moments where the person in command is forced to choose who lives and who might die in a given crisis situation. These are among the weightiest decisions in the game, and are always difficult decisions for characters in the show, especially considering how close and friendly the main characters in the show usually are with each other. This is the kind of deeply moral and ethical question that most other genres of video games are rarely able to execute. Resurgence also shares a lot in common with old point-and-click adventures. It frequently employs light puzzles themed after scientific and engineering problems, and it utilizes the tricorder about as much as phasers, maybe even a bit more. This isn't the first time Star Trek has been adapted into point-and-click adventures or cinematic choose-your-own-adventure games, and the results have actually been generally positive. Games like Star Trek 25th Anniversary, Star Trek Judgment Rights, The Next Generation of Final Unity, and Deep Space Nine Harbinger are often held up as some of the best Star Trek games because of the ways that they capture the cooperative problem-solving nature of so many Star Trek episodes, and usually manage to capture the spirit of the TV shows and movies. I remember playing the 25th Anniversary game on the NES. I liked it, kind of, I guess, but it was really friggin' hard, and I don't think I ever got past like the second or third level. It's something that I've always wanted to go back and replay now that I'm older and smarter and more mature as a gamer, but I've never gotten around to it. More recently, I've heard that the PC version is way better, so I bought it along with Judgment Rights in a package deal on Steam as part of my research for this video. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find a playable version of a Final Unity, at least not from a place on the internet that I trust downloading something from. And yeah, the PC version of 25th Anniversary is way better than the NES version. It's a completely different game. It opens right into a mock battle with another Starfleet ship, which is completely unfair bullshit, but after that, it's actually really good. The CD version is even fully voice acted by the original actors.
Demons, Klingons, avalanches. What's next? The Wicked Witch of the West?
That is not logical, Doctor.
It wasn't supposed to be logical, you green-blooded falcon. Why does everything have to be so damn logical?
I'm assuming that the original game must have come with an instruction manual that included keyboard mappings and a map of all the planets, because otherwise I have no idea how Interplay expected players to know where to go or what to do, but then again, that's also just how games worked in the 80s and the 90s. 25th Anniversary is split into a series of episodes in which the player is sent to a place, you scan things with your tricorder, you talk to all the people, and then you solve a problem or puzzle. The game also gives bonus points for behaving in a manner befitting a Starfleet officer. For example, in one mission, you have to liberate a space station occupied by Romulans who all become infected with the disease and incapacitated. You could let them die and retake the station and complete the mission, but you get bonus points if you actually cure them and give them water to drink and let them return home alive and healthy. Each episode of the game is like a short and shallow episode of the TV series, or maybe closer to the animated series in terms of the complexity of the plots. The episodes of 25th Anniversary are completely independent, self-contained episodes, while the chapters of Judgment Rights combine to tell a bit more of a longer and more complex story. Deep Space Nine Harbinger is also similar, but a lot more dialogue-driven and more drawn out, as it tells a single story spread out over a few hours of gameplay. It's also about talking to the DS9 characters and solving a series of related problems, and again, it's almost like watching an episode of the TV show, except, maybe not quite as good. And also with a lot more tedious walking down empty hallways. There were also some FMV choose-your-own-adventure games, one of which was Star Trek Borg, in which Q tries to help the player survive the infamous Battle of Wolf 359, and this game received mixed or negative reviews when it was released. It's basically the Star Trek equivalent of the classic Dragon's Lair arcade. It's supposedly a game about choice, but all of the choices are either meaningless false choices, or they are insta-death gotchas that have no permanent effect, force a restart, and which ultimately end up being meaningless.
But aren't you forgetting someone or something?
We should have known.
but it has since gained a bit of a cult status, and I often see it cited as an example of a good Star Trek game in retrospect or hindsight. Probably owing to its live-action FMV nature, making it look and feel just like watching an episode of Star Trek. And, of course, there's the frequent doses of John Delancey, which certainly helps. Its sister game, Star Trek Klingon, seems to be far less favorably remembered, if anybody remembers it at all. It features Robert O'Reilly reprising his role as Gowron. I love me some Gowron just as much as the next Trekkie.
Glory to you and your house.
That right there is just pure television gold. But Robert O'Reilly is still no John Delancey. The purpose of the game was supposedly to help teach about Klingon culture, which is actually a fairly admirable and even appropriate take on the Star Trek IP, which has always encouraged and valued inclusiveness and cultural exchange and understanding.
Did you think I would kill you, Lord Holm? You have heard this about Klingons. We kill anything that stands in our way. We enjoy the taste of innocent blood. Lies. Honor is what we treasure. Honor above all things. You outsiders, you see only our fierceness, our love of battle. You do not see the tech that shapes our every act. This is why I, Gowron, leader of the Klingon High Council, have decided to break the secrecy that shrouds our culture. That will change when you have finished this holodeck adventure with me. This test. You will have learned more than how to live as a Klingon. You will learn how to be Klingon. You will no longer be Nov, weak as a Quahom, but you will be a warrior. Then, it will be an honor to kill you.
So even if it is silly and not very good as a game, I think it does deserve some brownie points for the spirit in which it was conceived and developed. Most of these point-and-click Star Trek games are fairly well regarded among fans of the franchise. It seems like this might be the most consistently successful genre of Star Trek video games, though point-and-clicks aren't really for everybody. Modern audiences in particular may view them as older and clunkier precursors to things like modern-day interactive movies or walking sims. The Interplay games in particular suffer from all of the common problems of 90s point-and-clicks. Lots of pixel hunting, esoteric puzzle design requiring either lots of memorization or a pen and paper being handy, and also some nasty gotcha traps that may or may not have been effectively signposted to players. I recommend having a walkthrough readily available. Regardless, these are among the best and most faithful adaptations of the source material into the video game medium. At their heart, these games are all about the characters solving Star Trek-themed problems with methods resembling those used by the characters on the TV show. It's about as much as you can ask for any video game adapted from any TV show or movie. If you're looking for new Star Trek material to whet your appetite after playing through Resurgence, then tracking down playable copies of these games will probably be your safest bet for an enjoyable Star Trek experience. Some of them are available on Steam and/or Good Old Games, so go check them out.